Let us prepare to welcome and hear Sister Kaylin McNeil in light of the movie Red Tails. I have known, and it really brought back to my remembrance that her father was a Tuskegee Airman. And I thought today would be an appropriate time to hear just a piece of her story about her father and what it's like to have that opportunity to be around that kind of influence. Won't you hear Kaylin McNeil? Yeah.
Good morning, Shalom. Good morning. As Pastor said last week, the movie Red Tails came out. It just gives us a glimpse of what it was like to be a part of the Tuskegee experiment that happened between 1941 and 1945. I was a little hesitant about watching the film because my dad is a Tuskegee Airman. And you see, for me, this is a very personal thing. My name is Kaylin Brantley McNeil, and I am the daughter of Charles Vernon Brantley. He went to Sumner High School, graduated from Stowe College, and he was part of Tuskegee Airmen class March 1944. He was a member of the 100 Fighter Squadron, part of the 332nd Fighter Group. He served in both World War I and the Korean War. His contributions have been noted in books, many books. He's part of the Tuskegee Airmen display at the Science Center, and he's on the mural, Blacks in Flight, at the airport. The sad thing is, as a child, I knew my dad was part of the Air Force. I knew he served in the war, but I had no idea of what he really did and what it meant to America, what he went through, the impact that that had, the obstacles he had to go through, or what kind of man he must have been to make it through. See, nobody talked about this in our school. It wasn't in our history books. It wasn't on television. There were no movies. Nobody was saying anything about it. Nobody was making a big deal about what they did. So we didn't know. It was called the Tuskegee experiment because at that time there was an inherent and pervasive belief that Negroes didn't have the intelligence or the aptitude to become Army pilots. And so this experiment would show whether or not blacks had the mental wherewithal, the physical dexterity, or the courage to be fighters. Because the military was totally segregated, if they were going to have an experimental group of pilots, they also had to have an entire black base with all the support functions that it took to keep the planes in the air. In the 40s, there weren't a lot of opportunities for us. And so when this experiment became available, thousands of blacks applied. Most of them were screened out. And those who did get selected to become pilots, 70% of them washed out, whether it was because of performance or their inability to restrain themselves against all the inequities that came upon them, or whether it was for a number of minor or made-up reasons. Nevertheless, 900 graduated. 450 of them made it overseas to fight. "66 pilots were killed. 32 were prisoners of war. Ironically, those that were prisoners of war in Germany received more respect than they did at home. German prisoners of war here in America had privileges that were denied blacks, such as being able to go to the cafeterias wherever they wanted to sit, go to the theaters wherever they wanted to. We couldn't do that. White pilots flew no more than 52 missions, and then they were rotated back into the States. Black pilots had to fly much more because there were no replacements and there was no place to rotate them to. I thank God for protecting my father, who flew 77 missions. They became known as the Red Tail Angels because of how effectively they protected the bombers. And on March 24th, 1945, they became one of the first fighter units to escort bombers on a 1,600-mile round-trip mission to Berlin. This was the longest bomber mission in the war, and my father was part of that mission. Flying P-51 propeller planes, they encountered for the first time 25 German jets. And during that fight, my father was one of 3 who shot down a German jet that day. For this, he received the Distinguished Flying Cross. Overall, the Tuskegee Airmen flew over 15,000 sorties, 1,000 missions, and they earned more than 900 medals, including 8 Purple Hearts. They overcame segregation and prejudice and became one of the most highly respected fighter groups in the war. They proved conclusively that African Americans could, in fact, fly military planes. The Tuskegee Airmen are one of the puzzle pieces of our American history and one of the foundation blocks of the Civil Rights Movement. And in 2007, 62 years after the war, they finally received the Congressional Gold Medal. And today, we have a motion picture made after them. I have learned a lot through this. I've learned that in school we learn about history, his story. But this, the Tuskegee Airmen, is my story. I've learned that no matter what life brings me, I can do all things through Jesus Christ who strengthens me. I've learned that it is important to know where I come from, to understand where I am, to better understand where I want to go. And this is one thing else I've learned, that even as I was living in the house every day with history and didn't realize it, there are untold stories among us. And as we walk into next month, Black History Month, I encourage all of us to take a moment, talk to our elders, learn our story. Pastor, church, guest, thank you for allowing me a moment to share my story.